Welcome, reanimated fans, to this week's episode. We are focusing on yet another episode of the last season, the last part of The Walking Dead, the OG series. So I am here as always, and I hope you would expect, with my intrepid co-host, Stuart Tiffin. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, AJ. Thanks for having me on the show.
And you know, we're gonna chat about this episode. I deliberately did not watch it, which is probably a good idea. And we have just a couple of little tidbits, but not too much in the way of news out there. So if you want to kick it off, Stuart, let's go.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. It's not a lot of news, but the news that dropped this week was super exciting for me. I did not think The Last of Us was coming out before next summer. And so I guess it was a leak. Somebody left the premiere date in the app is how this news broke. But then once it was confirmed, I in our show notes, I have a screen capture from Bella Ramsey's Instagram account, I guess, who is the female lead from the show. And she says, okay, it's January 15th. Here it is. So very exciting news to get us through those dark winter months. I don't know how long it's going to be. I imagine it'll be like 6 episodes because it's going to be a big, expensive show, right?
Yeah. So I'm excited about it. This will be really cool to watch, in the doldrums after all the holidays. So I'm very excited to see this thing. And then I think that the only other thing that was sort of on the roster was this Blight trailer, which I'll let you talk about because this is your thing.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of internet you inhabit, but this was definitely a big part of my internet. This trailer dropped for a game that I've never heard of called Blight. This also fills a niche that I feel like is underserved in our genre, which is medieval zombies. I mean, we get it with the Joseon drama of Korea from Kingdom, but we do not see it typically in the European area. So this is a trailer that follows a character, third person. It has kind of the look and feel of a Dark Souls-like game. And it is very muddy and very brutal. And it's just like a knight in plate armor running around and killing zombies and then avoiding humans in a quite beautiful and filthy looking areas. I mean, some criticisms that I've already seen out there are, well, this knight in plate mail armor also does like a low crawl through a swamp, which, plate mail typically weighed between 33 and 55 pounds, and doing a low crawl in that and trying to be stealthy without clanking your way through the swamp would be really difficult. But it's a game, and it fills that hole, what I could perceive as a missing part of our genre. I believe there has been a zombie movie set in the medieval times. You and I have never seen it, but it's on one of our many lists of things we would like to see one day.
Well,
did you watch the video?
I did. So yeah, I think we can see what happens with this thing. And as an aside, and talking about the Joseon dynasty, there was this whole weird little cabinet, which I think I sent you a photo of, Stuart, of the different hats of the Joseon dynasty, and I was really excited to see it. Although I think it was a semi-modern interpretation or something, but they were like the dynasty of many hats, and it made me very happy.
Yeah, wasn't it that was like a name for Joseon, was like the land of hats or something along those lines?
Yeah, it was something like that, and I was like, yes, somebody else agrees with me. So anyway, that was exciting. And an aside. But without further ado, do you want to talk about what's been lost? Not our minds, obviously, but that's the title of this episode.
Those were lost long ago. This one was written by Eric Mountain and directed by Aisha Tyler, who is also the focus of Angela Kang's glowing after show explanation. And Aisha Tyler, we knew, had done Fear the Walking Dead because she actually also played a part on that show. I don't know if she's done the World Beyond, but Angela Kang made it sound like she had directed multiple Walking Dead shows, or all of them even. I don't know if she just was overstating it. Like she's only done Fear and The Walking Dead, and just in that alone, in that accomplishment, she is kind of standing by herself.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
Were there any directorial choices in this episode that you can remember that would make you think, "Huh, Aisha Tyler"?
not per se. I was a little bit more focused. Like I've been really focused about how they're trying to sort of spin out these tales, looking at the characters, looking at and there's specific things that kind of happen like in this episode that are kind of interesting and not to me not very surprising. There is a lot of stuff with Carol in this episode that I do think that Aisha Tyler was pretty good at dealing with and at sort of presenting and reminding us of. And what I'm talking about is, Carol's tendency to sort of be this person that started like she's a very good chameleon and she's very good at sort of playing both sides of the field to her not her own interest, but I guess though that could be implied a little bit, but more in the interest of what she views as the interest of her own little community, right? So that was some of the things in this episode that I was really interested about. Specifically something that happens at the end, but I don't want to give we have to talk about that then, but I don't want to give away too many spoilers.
There was
And so
some good combat. Like it turns out that she's pretty good at directing combat.
yep, no, there was
Um,
definitely some good combat scenes too.
yeah,
But I thought that this was a good episode. And I also think that it answered one of our long trending questions about this whole community and how it's running, right? Um, because one of the things that we have talked a lot about is okay, so we only see the same X amount of people, but it takes an enormous number of people to keep the things that we're seeing in this community going and so many different pieces and levels of manufacturing and things like that. So,
yeah. They
but they
start to
don't
introduce
show it.
new characters though in this episode.
They do.
Like because yeah, you got 50,000 people. You're gonna have there should be a huge cast
Yep.
of of important people in the Commonwealth, and we see a few of them, and we see a different. I don't know if we'd seen this female colonel before from the Commonwealth Army who's like standing in for Mercer almost in this episode.
I don't know if we have, but yeah, she stood out definitely.
You
Uh,
know, like she's accredited person. Yeah, like so it kind of what to me that sets up is unless it was just like Mercer was unavailable that day or Michael Shaw, I forget that dude's name every time. He has three names. But what they're probably setting up is that one of them will be the company person and one of them will be the good guy and they will be fighting each other, right? Like to me that's Chekhov's traitor or something like that. You're gonna have it's probably gonna be Mercer is gonna be fighting against Milton at some point. That's
yeah.
my prediction anyway. And
Oh
so
yeah,
they're
definitely.
introducing this character to be the company person who will fight him. Um, and you know that's cool. I'm down with that. This episode also introduces a very unlikely scenario where at the beginning, the first scene is well after the montage, which is of Daryl and Carol's romance, platonic as it may be.
Yeah.
Um, the first scene is Carol in the bakery, and she hears Ezekiel's footsteps and IDs him by his feet, and then within like 5 seconds, he is hoodwinked or absconded with, and she has no idea how this happened or where he
Yeah.
went.
It's really weird.
That to me,
Um,
that's kind of a weird disconnect. And I just said, you know, this is a great episode and everything, but to to call out that she has these amazing senses and can hear who people are by the way they walk, and then completely not notice that he was just taken 3 feet away from her, I feel like is a
right. And
strange
this
choice.
and this is the comment I kind of made in the last episode is that the one thing that is hard for me to sort of like not accept, but like that seems weird to me is that Carol and Daryl and our little group of heroes here or ragtag um anti-heroes, whatever you want to call them, have been doing this a really long time. They've come up against groups like this. Um, with all the events that have been happening, I don't feel like Carol would be sitting there in the bakery doing what she's doing. I also feel like if they have these weird little like plans to escape, or like how they had the kids up on the fire escape like already and whatever, I feel like they would have gotten everybody out already at this point. Instead, they all, people that they know and people that they care about are being captured, obviously, as collateral. And to me, it's sort of strange that it was done this easily, I guess. Um,
Yeah,
and
and these
right,
guys who they send after them apparently are like really hardcore, and they go to the effort of showing you that because of how Daryl is handling it. We've seen him kill people so easily.
right.
Angela Kang explains it away that he was with children, and that's why he's having such a hard time. But the children are not in the scene when
No,
we are introduced to it. He is just having a really hard time fighting off a guy who he already stabbed and left a knife inside.
right.
And I'm like, this guy's overpowering you, Daryl. Like maybe you're just having an off day. But wow, it feels like they have a problem with Daryl where Angela Kang again talks at the end of the show about how he's not a superhero. He's just a guy who's really tough and scrappy. But they've
They've,
made too many
they've set
choices in
him
the
up.
previous. Yeah, they've done too much to make him feel impervious and really strong to have him now struggle against this
Yeah,
one dude.
right. And then that's the other thing. It's like, okay, we know who Daryl and Carol are. We know who they are. And again, it makes it sort of the idea that the Milton militia is just able to sort of snag all these people so quickly, and that our people weren't prepared for it, because obviously they understand what they're dealing with, or at least that's what it felt like. So that felt a little weird, but I do understand why they did it, because you couldn't have that great scene that we're going to talk about later on between um like Carol and Hornsby, and Carol and Daryl and Hornsby. And so I know that that's part of why it was set up. Um, the other thing that is set up is, the idea of some of their people being sort of involved in this government. And Yumiko has been uncomfortable with her role and with Milton, and with some of the things that the Commonwealth is doing, and is really put into a particularly difficult position. And I think that they use her as a very specific example of the fact that it's sort of a more sort of present example of the fact that they're using her brother as collateral to make her do and to exert pressure on her to do what they want her to do.
Yeah, and I can
Um,
see how this would get to this point because she's basically being put in the same position
yep,
that Mercer is every
yep,
day.
yep,
Like it was probably never that overt that Max was a hostage almost for the Miltons. I mean, she was a willing participant in their regime for a long time. But the way he reacts to threats is like, I'm not going to rock the boat because I've got to worry about my sister and the people of this community. Yumiko they try to put her in the same boat, like, oh, we've got all your friends and your brother. And her response is kind of predictably Alexandrian in a way, right? Like I
yes,
said
yes,
last time, they basically are fine watching the world burn in defense of their principles most of the time. Like during the Savior War, there was a while when they were just like, okay, sir, whatever you say, boss, to Negan. And I feel like they're not up for that. And so Milton should know better. She hasn't done her homework on these people, but it's it's like and also the Miltons already got burned once by saying really terrible things and not knowing if they
mm-hmm.
were being recorded.
Yeah,
Where she's basically threatening everybody who's been taken and Tommy, their doctor. Yeah, that was just a really strange series of choices.
right. And so predictably, like there's the whole piece where Eugene is taking the fall for the Milton stuff that has happened, and Yumiko's supposed to be prosecuting him, and I was like, oh, I bet she's going to come out and say she'll defend him in the end, which is exactly what she did. And I
Yeah,
think
because
that
you give her a pedestal, and what do you expect her to do?
right, right. And then the weird thing is, it's like, so she calls out the thing about her brother, which I don't know what that's going to do.
He's
Um,
just gonna die at the end of the season because he's
right,
a spineless
obviously, Yeah,
spineless.
like obviously he has to. But I think, at least from my point of view, the most interesting piece of all of this is the stuff with Lance Hornsby and Carol and, he there's the scene where he's, sort of lying in this weird bloodbath of the, uh, uh with zombie Sebastian, and Daryl like comes in and dispatches Sebastian. And then, of course, they think he has knowledge and they want him to lead them to where people are being held, and so that they can maybe get a jump on their friends. And look, I think that Josh Hamilton plays this role incredibly well, and he is
Ugh.
so good in this, that, he predictably is like, okay, what can I play to my advantage? And this whole particular episode starts out with a montage about Carol, or Carol's like, sort of a reminder of her journey. And so it is, I think, meant to be satisfying with the end of this particular journey with Hornsby, that he certainly has underestimated her, although he hasn't really, because he calls out exactly who she is. So I do think he fully understands it. He's just hoping that he'll be able to somehow bring that
he
over to his
he hasn't,
advantage.
yeah, he's unrealistically optimistic about how things are going to play out. One of the other big, well, things that I wrote in all caps when I was watching this episode was they even took dog. Like these
I know,
guys,
and that's what Daryl says, which is like
yeah,
really funny. It's like, well, okay. Um,
which is just so unnecessary. But yeah, so Hornsby's like also completely gone around the bend. By the time they get into his cell,
mhm.
he's moaning a mantra to himself. He's
Mhm.
looking at that coin. Um, it's and he hasn't killed Sebastian. I guess he feels like he can't,
Yeah.
because he'd be punished if he did.
Yep.
But they Daryl puts Sebastian down, and before they leave the cell, Hornsby squishes his head and leaves his calling card just to twist the knife on Milton, which lets you know he's not looking to work with Milton in the future. Like
No.
he knows, and the audience can figure out that this act does not leave him with a bridge back. And maybe there never was one, and maybe everybody was up clear on that. But to me, I was like, this guy can always wriggle around and find another way. But by
Yeah.
doing that, he's definitely throwing in his lot, almost certainly throwing in his lot with Carol. But but every time he opens his mouth, Carol trusts him a little less. So it's kind of funny to watch them after they escape the prison, and Daryl stays behind to
Yep.
hold off the guards, and escapes very improbably somehow. Every time Hornsby talks to Carol, you can just see it on her face that she's like, "Nah, you are a very untrustworthy individual."
Right. And I mean, that's the other thing. It's like they even give him, as much of a chance as he deserves, but they certainly do not want this guy anywhere near them. And he has a bit of hubris, and he reveals probably too much. And they both are like, well, we don't need you anymore because you just told us sort of what's happening. And now we're going to give you, I mean, I think they fully expected him to do what he did. And they were waiting for their moment to take him out. But like, it was, a pretty, I liked the whole dynamic between these three. It was a great scene. And
I was a little
definitely,
disappointed that he was so certain that he couldn't survive out in the world. Maybe that's just like true of most Commonwealth people who haven't come in recently. Maybe most of them, faced with the decision of having to go out, would be like, I can't live out here. This will never work. But he's so certain of that he's willing to go up against Daryl and Carol, who he knows are ultimate badasses.
right.
It's just like it's almost like suicide by cop in that scenario.
Yeah, and I mean it's nice to see them paired together, and I like that.
There was some
But
weird framing in in that scene because Carol is standing like 4 or 5 feet behind Daryl and kind of behind
yeah,
him, but
yeah.
she's also talking to Hamilton, not Josh, to Hamilton, to Hornsby. And I was just like, I was wondering why they had her standing that far back. Maybe it was so that she could hide the fact that she was drawing an arrow. You could even see it in the scene that she already had an arrow on her bowstring.
She had it ready to go. I was like, all right, cool, cool.
But it was just, yeah, I was curious, like, why, like, was that to make her seem less threatening? Um, but yeah, it was weird. Like, in some context, that would look like Daryl was, as the male in front of her to either shield, protect something. But that's not the case with those two. So
Hmm.
I'm like, what is going on here? It's interesting.
Yeah. But the big reveal is something that I mean, it at least explains a little bit, but
The fact that there's trains.
that there's a supply train, that the missing people are being basically used as labor.
Do we know
Um,
that?
yeah, he mentions it.
Huh.
And so I think at least um
Mm.
we will hopefully see a little bit more of this so that it's not just in our imaginations, but that would explain how things are kept running. And we did see sort of a little bit just when Hornsby went out to do his visits with that little community that he was having an altercation with, that Carol was with. Not quite the same thing, but we did see that he was dealing with different communities in a pretty nasty way. And, at least in that particular case, it wasn't, um, you know, it, he was certainly using leverage and things like that, but they still seem to be dealing with him either out of necessity, but still out of their own free will. But this is a thing where, um, you know, probably they are not necessarily there voluntarily. So it shows another level and a pretty nasty level of the Commonwealth that we haven't yet seen. So I'm curious to see if the next few episodes hopefully reveal that. I guess they're following the supply train, so we'll see something, right?
I don't feel like I understand. I guess it makes sense that they would be putting these people to work on a chain gang. They could also just hire them to do this. I don't understand why they would feel like they need to do slave labor. But maybe that's just so that we know that they're bad guys. But it
I
just
think
feels
it's
unnecessary because it's a closed economy. Like
right. I agree,
Milton
but
can print money. I don't know. Doesn't seem to make any sense.
right.
So there's a bunch of scenes that have happened before this train station though, like Hornsby leading Carol into a dark tunnel where they run into some zombies. Not a lot here happens to like drive the story forward.
Right.
Um, but you're kind of waiting for Hornsby to double cross her, and he doesn't. But he's also not like helping very much. Um, but I don't know. Like, did you have any feelings about that scene where when they go in there and then there's actually a really cool effects moment in that tunnel because of the zombie with the skin that just comes completely off. But yeah, I guess there wasn't a lot like for the plot in there.
Yeah. Yeah, not a ton. I think this is just to set up, the Carol and Daryl stuff and then to basically, you know, move the plot forward to see, like, I think we're going to have to see the missing people at some point, and there's going to be some rescue effort. We're going to have to see the people that are held hostage for a big showdown or something like
There's
that.
also the scene of Tomi, like Yumiko goes to the hospital and talks to Tomi, who is like, you should do whatever Milton tells you to do because that's
Yeah.
survival, which is how you know that he is not worth holding on to. And Yumiko kind of has some of that realization on her face, even though she holds him up as, yeah, like this hero to the Commonwealth in her right before she says, I'm going to be defending him and, screw you. Like the fact that he tells her to do what Milton wants kind of just underscores for us, the audience, that this doctor slash baker is a spineless jellyfish and probably not worth worrying too much about. But I don't know. That's a tough sell. So we'll see how the show continues to treat that relationship. But Yumiko runs into Connie in the hospital, who we haven't seen in a little while, who has also escaped her captors by stabbing one in the leg and then following and then coming to the hospital to find him. And then Yumiko is like, I will track down this guy and find out where they're keeping our friends. Tries to follow him through our obligatory Commonwealth Town Square scene. And he like completely makes her. Not right away, but it's a little absurd to me because if you look at the amount of background actors going through the scene too, there's just people. It's like that scene from the Savior War where there are 300 saviors in a room and they're all walking in different directions. It was an insane scene for Yumiko to be caught in a
Mm-hmm.
way. But and then Milton like gloats about it to her later. And it was like that. I didn't love that. I thought that
I
was
didn't love it
unrealistic.
either. I thought it was unrealistic as well. So eh. So no, this was not, I mean, other than the Daryl and Carol and Hornsby stuff, which is why I was talking about that stuff more. I didn't love the Yumiko aspect of this episode. I found it to be a little bit ridiculous, but look, I think they're trying to highlight the different characters and trying to give them each a little bit of the stage. So I think that that was part of this. And I do think, at least for Yumiko, who was, we've watched her with her different groups, we've watched her go through a lot of different journeys in this, but in terms of like her sense of right and wrong and her sense of what the community should be, I think that this, you have to kind of figure out where you stand, and she did, and this was her line in the sand. So, um, and I thought I did like the scene between her and Eugene, where he's just like, you got to do what you got to do, and he was very just sort of like, I'm just going to take my fate, and that's kind of where he's been all along. And maybe that spurred Yumiko on, because it's not even like he's sort of like, well, have faith in our friends and our community. And it was interesting, the sort of difference between the conversation with Eugene and the conversation with Tommy. And so even though Tommy is like a blood relation, I would say, the community that she has chosen is much more in line with what she believes in at this point. So
It
that's going to
seems that
be
way.
interesting to see how that plays out. And I think you're right. I think Toby's probably going to die
Well,
at the
he's also a doctor in The Walking Dead, right? I mean,
right.
sometimes
So
two of them die in an episode.
there's no good track record for those doctors. We all know this.
No,
So
and Ezekiel has been doing some doctory stuff lately, so it might not bode well for him either. Um, and honestly, she doesn't make that decision to say she's going to defend Eugene until after she hears that Colonel's radios say that Carol, Daryl, and Hornsby are all out in the wind. And that probably paints a little bit of her decision, because she's like, wait, there's still a chance of outside help. And so even though I'm putting my friends and Tommy at risk in a way, there's a non-zero chance that it's Carol, for Pete's sake. She's
I
she's a
know.
master of coming in and blowing up Terminus, right? So we'll
Yep.
see how it goes.
That's all I could think about. I was like, she's just gonna go and single-handedly do something crazy, and
Well,
Carol,
they
like, at
showed
some
that
point.
scene even
I
in
know, I
the
know. I was
montage.
like, yeah, we're gonna go back to that. Remember this, Carol. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
and you know what, I was reading through my notes too. Hornsby and Carol in the dark tunnel. There is some plot that I think will come back, even though Hornsby's dead. He's trying to persuade Carol to like put him on the throne after Milton's been dethroned, right? Like that's kind of what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
But he's going about it by saying, "You don't want that job.
Yep.
After Milton is out, there's going to be 50,000 people you're responsible for, and think of the children, think of the next generation." And I think those arguments actually do resonate, and they
Mhm.
would resonate with Carol. And even though she has been saying, even in this episode and in the episodes beforehand, this isn't my problem anymore. This community is not, they're not my people. I think at the end of the day, she will be swayed by what he was saying and realize the scope of the responsibility of a regime change. Like, you can't, if you just cut the head off the monster, you think everything's just going to go fine, like it's all just going to settle down. No, that's 50,000 people who
Well,
would probably die.
also remember, this is Queen Carol. So
Yeah,
she and Ezekiel helped run a community. Granted, it wasn't quite as complex as this,
it was
but
like 120 people
it was
maybe.
definitely not the same. But she's not exactly a stranger to what that means. So I think, you know, in terms of, she does have a dedication to the children and the more vulnerable people, just still like playing in from long, like Sophia times. So like I definitely think that we saw that. I agree with you. I think that plot's going to come back, or that theme is going to come back, and we're going to have to see what happens there. But
Yeah, they've been laying that
um,
groundwork in the episode before this with all the I want to stay
yeah,
and help. No, I want to leave.
yeah,
This
and
is
then
definitely coming back.
also the New Kingdom. Come on, come on. I think
Yeah.
we're seeing some things that are being pretty clearly laid out for
Yeah.
what's going to happen. So,
Um,
um,
after they after they have to put down Hornsby at the train station, I always find this such an odd choice. Like, Carol does not retrieve her arrow out of
nope.
his throat, and they don't put him down. And I just feel like this is zombie apocalypse littering. Like, don't not retrieving your arrow is just wasteful. You have
Yeah.
10 arrows. Like, what are you thinking? But like leaving a guy to turn, it's either vengeful or it's irresponsible.
Well, I think it's definitely vengeful. I think they feel like he deserves it. I think
He
Got
deserves to be a zombie and who might kill one of their friends one day. Like
Well,
kind
and
of
that's
that's
the problem, but that's the
yeah.
problem with it. And that's why I'm like, I don't know. I think just better to take that dude out because wouldn't it suck if one of your friends got eaten by Hornsby?
Yeah.
Like, same thing with why Sebastian needed to go down too, right? So,
That's kind of exactly what happened with Carl and Dale. Like Carl was messing around with that zombie in the swamp in season 2, and then that same zombie comes and scoops out Dale's insides an episode or two later. And Carl feels bad about that for a while, and
but never in the
until
house. So there you go.
he was never ever in the house. So the final scene of this episode is the people on the bus getting injections in their necks. And I mean, have you seen 13 Lives or whatever it is, that Ron Howard biopic of the Thai kids in the cave?
I have not, but I have heard good things about it.
Well, you don't have to watch that film. There's a lot of actually there's I think there's like a bunch of documentaries and stuff about it now, because what they did was they sedated these kids, right, to get them out because the cave was still flooded. Um, Sedating people, anesthesia, and what was the word? And anesthetists and anesthesiologists. It's a really, it's not like a clear science. It's you can overdo it, you can underdo it, you can really injure somebody. And they're giving these people sedatives on a moving bus in the dark, just shooting them in the neck, and this just some soldier doing it. And then you have to also remember they've got the children.
Mm-hmm.
Are they sedating the children? And dog, is dog being sedated? That was the only thought going through my head while I'm watching this. Like they're in a bus that's being driven,
Yeah.
and they're doing insanely delicate work at night, and I thought it felt really uncool. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess you have some medical professionals here, but it's incredibly difficult to do that for kids, and do it well. Like you can kill somebody pretty easily.
Yeah.
And you can also kill people who have like health conditions and things like that. And and do you also have a vet? And as you said, I thought the same thing. I'm like, did they also sedate dog? So
Dog
guess
probably doesn't need to be sedated. He could just be caged or crated or whatever. But also, I imagine a bunch of these people don't need to be sedated.
right. It's just weird. So I'm not totally sure. I think they're just trying to make them seem even more evil, if that's possible. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
It was an odd choice. It also kind of underscores the fact that okay, they've got medicine,
True.
all these nods to their ability to produce things that shouldn't exist anymore.
Right.
And saying that out loud makes me remember that while Tommy was being that kind of coward, made me think people like him aren't supposed to be around anymore. Isn't that something somebody said on this show years ago in
Yeah.
the chronology of the shows? Like people like you are all supposed to be dead.
Hmm.
And I forget what the context was now, if it was like goody two shoes, like Boy Scouts, like Rick Grimes. Um, but when you run into someone as spineless as Tommy, who probably has never gone face to face with a zombie, or if he has, it was like really lucky that he got away, and who has zero principles. Actually, there were probably lots of people like that in the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. I guess that, the other piece that I just kept thinking about is like they're going through it's sort of a little in line with what you were saying. Like they could just pay the people to go and do this labor, to do whatever this is, because it is like kind of a closed community and everybody benefits.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that I do struggle with, and I have been struggling with overall for the Commonwealth stuff. It's like, well, you have these people doing these making these moves, and some of them seem to be so incredibly complex and convoluted, and also an enormous amount of energy expending on things that it feels like you wouldn't be able to do it because we're just trying to survive. And so this it to me, other than sort of driving the point home that these people are really evil, to me it doesn't make sense that this is even happening. So the whole sedation thing, the whole slave train thing, or whatever, the enslaved people of the community thing, even all the sort of effort, like, so if you have like a whole militia that you've trained, um and they're supposed to be both protecting the community from walkers, but also just protecting the elite in the community from the people in the community. Like it just feels like they're going to have their hands full more so with the walkers, at least from what we have seen. So I don't know that it all makes sense and fits together in a way that for me is like, okay, that I get that. I get why they made these decisions in the community. It isn't like, I don't know, like I guess the example I would give is the people that it's not like the things that they would be doing are so out, unless we're gonna maybe see this in the coming episodes, but it's like, we all need to eat, so there probably would be farmers in this community. It's like, do you really need to enslave people to do that, right?
Yeah,
um
this feels
it,
like a basic effort that
right.
everybody would be on board with. It
Right.
doesn't need to be.
And there's probably some people evil either who have those skills or would learn those skills, like other than
Yeah,
people like, I mean, Tommy learned how to be a baker, weirdo. But like it just feels like this doesn't make, like, this seems like so much effort for things that don't make sense, or like,
yeah. It
I don't
feels
know.
like a clumsy effort to do a Snowpiercer type metaphor of
Yeah,
like
no,
there's this,
totally.
especially when you introduce those donors at the beginning of this episode, the like well-heeled suits and ties people who are like, oh, I'm glad our donations have been well received or whatever. Shh, get down. There's a cat on the shelf that shouldn't be there. Get down.
Which cat?
Get down. Pinky, get down. You mother. But yeah, so it's very, I feel like it's not as good as Snowpiercer, and I didn't like Snowpiercer if you recall, but at
Mm-hmm.
least that metaphor was well established and developed.
Right.
And the like the Commonwealth is not a train, like it is, but it is also an environment where you should be able to get people to do things because it's in their mutual best interest.
Right.
And this class thing doesn't really work. As I've
No,
said before, I've said it enough times that I don't need to say it anymore.
it
It's
doesn't.
not
I
going to
mean,
work in this sort of zombie apocalypse scenario.
no, and so that's the thing that I just feel is a bit clunky, and I guess we'll have to see how this plays out. Maybe I'll change my mind. We'll have to see. But I think you get, as sort of exaggerated and bad as it was, I think even with the saviors, again, we talked about, we commented on this as well, of just like how many it would take them, and they would just magically sort of appear and have these like sort of coordinated efforts in what was clearly a very difficult community to live in. um but that, to me, some of the things that they were doing made a lot more sense, like, and it was a specific type of totalitarian leadership under Negan. And so in this case, this is definitely, I mean, it's commentary on the class, the divisions. So we'll have to see how this plays out, but it doesn't seem fully formed to me. So we'll have
No,
to,
I
you know,
mean, yeah, there's definitely shades of was it Land of the Dead,
yeah,
the
definitely.
Romero movie where they the Dennis Hopper and his people were living in the tower,
Mm-hmm.
and John Leguizamo and the rest of those other guys were
Kind
out
of out there.
in their apocalypse truck
Yeah.
scavenging. Um, yeah, so it the Commonwealth has never been as developed as I wanted it to be, and maybe to do it the way I want it would cost $7 million more. But I want to feel like there are ways you can do this with dialogue. Like you maybe don't show me the farms and the factories, but talk about them, um, and make Milton less mustache twirly because she is now
Right.
by um just having her trying to like lead through dynasty instead of a transition of government to another qualified candidate instead of slave train. It
Right.
does feel just a little heavy handed.
Well, like, so that's one of the things that I was like, oh, this would have been a real opportunity. Like, for example, when they had her sort of discussing the fact that there was extra left in the Founders Day fund.
Mm-hmm.
And the suggestion by oh gosh, what, uh
Max.
by Max to like, oh, well, maybe we could use this as a way to like build the community and things like that. And I thought that was like an opportunity for them to sort of show a little bit more like why Milton either got the job or had the job. They make it mustache twirly, so she's like, "Oh no, that just goes back. Why would we do that?"
Yeah.
Like it would to me, it would have made more sense to kind of show maybe one of the decisions Milton has had to make, which you could disagree with, but maybe you could be like, "Oh, well, I guess like I get why she's sort of in this position," and it would have made it to me the area a little bit more gray and interesting. Um, because I feel like from what we have seen of Milton and her quote unquote dynasty, I don't know that I believe that people would have kept her in power. So other than to sort of, I guess, keep their creature comforts, but it feels like there's a lot of breakdowns across the board with some of these things. And I also think that based on what the big reveal with the sort of, the hot mic or the hot recording, whatever you want to call it, I don't know that she would still have the support that they seem to be acting like she has. Like it does feel like it would have fallen apart a little bit more quickly, or at least people would have been skeptical.
Yeah,
Like,
and they're not
so,
they're not showing us the authoritarian side of things. We have soldiers everywhere, and there were some scenes of people looking at the soldiers, like
right.
in the town square. If that's supposed to tell me like, oh, they're uncomfortable with the military presence that's in the Commonwealth now, okay, I guess it's kind of a stretch because it was really like you could blink and you miss it sort of,
Right.
stuff. But you could make the argument that this upper class of Commonwealth is only holding on to power because of the Commonwealth Army. That
Mm,
makes sense. They are dressed like stormtroopers, like sure. But they haven't really made a huge effort to show us that yet.
right. And so I guess that's maybe, and maybe they will. And maybe they will in this next. And maybe it's that they are doing these things kind of in under the radar and definitely not in public view, like what happened at Negan's little tower settlement, right? So they go out there and they're being very quiet about the sort of nefarious things that they're doing. And in that case, it was because, Hornsby was doing his and that other crazy guy were doing their dirty work and taking care of these communities in a very strange way. And there was some, so that wasn't necessarily in the public peer view. So I guess we've seen a lot of the more nefarious stuff and maybe that isn't in the public eye, but it still feels like I hope they do a better job of telling this and seeing a little bit more where how the citizens are feeling at this point in the game.
Yeah.
And it may be that they're just scared and in some ways they have not been, this is a community that is not doing the sort of daily defense, so they're a little less prepared to sort of defend themselves or take over, and sort of just being passive may be the answer for them, right? Or seem like it's the best answer. So I guess we'll have to see how all this plays out.
Yeah, I think we are definitely a couple steps ahead of where the show wants us to be right now.
Yeah.
In some ways, but overall, this episode was still entertaining. It had fun combat. I don't know if it's cool that Daryl was getting his ass handed to him
Yeah.
by
But
two
it looked nice though.
two red shirts. And Carol had to bail him out again.
Yeah.
But that was a good well choreographed combat. The Hornsby stuff was just scintillating. Like Josh Hamilton, I'm gonna miss him
Me
on this
too.
show, and the way he could squirm his way out of almost situations.
I will not miss his particularly bizarre interactions with Milton, though they were great and they added
I
to the whole thing. But those really just gave me the shivers.
think you were supposed to
Really,
get the shivers out of
I
those.
know, but they were just really gross. Anyway, but yeah, I
Yeah,
will miss him. He was really good as a big bad,
and apparently he wasn't the big bad. He was just kind of the medium bad,
the medium
uh,
bad,
who had a
the
lot of resources.
the opportunistic bad, right?
Yeah. So we'll continue talking about this, I guess, the next time we get together. And the episode up after this one is Outpost 22. So we can, and that aired that'll, yeah, we don't have to talk about when that aired because it'll have been a couple weeks. And then we're in the last 4 episodes of the season and of the show.
Yep. So looking forward to talking about that with you. If you have any comments about this episode in general, Hornsby, Daryl getting his butt kicked, whatever you want, what have you, feel free to send us an email at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find us on Podbean, and you have the information for that, Stuart, because I
Yeah,
don't quite have that down.
it's reanimated.podbean.com, and you can find almost all of our episodes there.
Awesome. Um, and until next time, ciao.
All right, bye bye.